Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Jason Finesmith speaking. Thank you, everybody, for joining in here.
Here's a matching video.
Wow, that's interesting. All right, great. Good morning. So people are signing on here. I've got 66 people and a lot of things going on this morning. We threw this event together 48 hours ago, Friday night, maybe got the idea and said, let's put this together. And a lot of people come together. The purpose of this call is really bringing together. So I'm gonna mute everybody.
It's
gonna be a little bit loud.
You're done.
Hang on one second.
Can you hear me okay?
Sound checks, everybody. I'm gonna put everybody on mute. Speakers, to unmute yourself when the time is right, hit *6. Adam, are you on? I believe Adam, I think you're on, but I'm not sure. So we'll check in a couple minutes here. I'm gonna mute everybody here. All right. And Aaron, I'm gonna make you host after I get the intro started, okay? All right, good morning. Thank you everybody for joining.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Hi, this is Dr. Fiterstein.
Oh, good. Adam, why don't you keep yourself on? Keep yourself as you are, not on mute. You're good. And I'm just about to introduce things. Are you okay to talk and be online for the next 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah, but I have to start talking now.
Oh, okay. All right. Folks, we're going to move right ahead. I'm going to skip the intro because Dr. Fiterstein and his colleague are busy with patients. They've got a professional sports team they're treating this morning. They're stepping aside from that to be on this call. So, Adam, I'm going to let you take the floor right now. This is being recorded, and let's go ahead and hear what you've got to say.
Dr. Griffin, are you with us? Okay, gentlemen. So I want to reassure everybody in some sense that we do know something about the coronavirus. We've been dealing with this since the 60s. Even though this is a new evolution, we are prepared for it in that sense. This is primarily spread by contact or fomites and droplet. Essentially what that means is the same way the flu is spread. If someone coughs on you and there's droplet that gets on you, or they actually touch your hand, then you can catch the illness. However, it's not the kind of thing like, for example, the measles or tuberculosis where you cough and the entire room gets it. It's not that situation, okay? So that's why everyone is promulgating good hand washing as being absolutely essential and using typical precautions. One thing that we are seeing is people are very panicked, they're very anxious, and because of that, they're coming in to get tested and they're going to the doctor's office. There's not a tremendous benefit to doing that if you feel essentially well. If you feel essentially well, the most intelligent thing to do without ambiguity is to stay home. 80% of people who get this are going to have a flu-like syndrome. They're going to feel sick for a few days, but they're going to get better. It's going to resolve. The other 20% will wind up at the hospital. Dr. Griffin, you with us? Okay, it seems like my colleague is unable to join us today. Testing right now that is being done being done by something called polymerase chain reaction. And it has what appears to be less than 1% false negative rate. So it is a very valuable test. There's not much else we can do right now. We do not have a treatment for this. Some people have floated possibilities of using proteases, like for example with the HIV medicines. They are not functioning for this virus. Many people are asking about vaccines. To date, there is no vaccine, okay? And it will probably be about a year before one is rolled out. I don't have a whole lot to tell you folks. I want you to stay home and get rest and to the degree that it's possible, self-quarantine.
Adam, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. I want to give you all the time that you feel you need to share what you have to share. So let me know when you have time for questions. But you gave me some facts the other day that I thought were interesting about what people are expecting to see with this disease.
Okay, we're expecting around 60 to 70% spread for disease. The epidemiologists are predicting 60 to 70% spread within 1 calendar year. As I said, 80% of people are just going to have an upper respiratory process and nothing more ominous than that. Of the ones that seek a higher level of care, they're going to wind up in the hospital. And it's looking right now, and this is a moving target. We do not know, but we're looking at around 2% of people who are having a very bad reaction.
Okay, is that what you're seeing? The death rate's likely to be about 2%, like in other countries? Early figures suggest that.
The data we were getting from China was fairly opaque, but right now that's the number that we're looking at. That's correct.
Okay. What's it like in the emergency room? Are people having enough?
The hospital system is getting overwhelmed. There's no question about that. And that's why I keep saying, to the degree that it's possible, people should stay home. Unless you're having trouble breathing when you walk to and from the kitchen, to and from the bathroom, unless you're short of breath, there's nothing the hospital can do for you. In fact, that's a hot zone. So I definitely recommend everyone stay home. There's no benefit to exposing yourself to that.
All right.
All right, Jay, I'm going to have to go.
Okay. All right. Do you have time for one more question?
Shoot, go ahead.
Okay. So what do you think is any possibility of any vaccines coming out? Here in a lot of stories, if the government rushes things and doesn't do normal protocols, what do you think as soon as it's possible that we're actually going to see the vaccine be available?
All right. So there are some vaccines that people have been working on. However, we have not done human testing. We're looking at a year before these come out. You just push it straight down. We're looking at about a year before these come out. I wish I had better news as far as medications and vaccines. We just don't have them right now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you think that...
Hey, you guys, this is Adam. This is Dr. Griffin. I don't know if you guys wanted me to jump in
Dr. Griffin.
Now.
Everybody, yes, everyone, let me introduce my colleague, Dr. Griffin. Dr. Griffin is an MD, PhD from Columbia and a specialist in infectious disease. In fact, he has forgotten more infectious disease than I will ever know in my lifetime. He is brilliant. We are thrilled to have him. Thank you for taking the call, Dr. Griffin. We appreciate it.
All right.
Yep. Hello, it's Dr. Griffin. I'm open to any questions you guys might have to throw my way.
All right. So I think what I'll do here is we've got chat line and folks that are on the call here. Let me just talk about how you can join on here. There's a little chat button in Zoom, which you can click on that and text in some questions. If you want to unmute yourself, there's a little button on the left-hand side, or if you're dialed in, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself. I don't know how well it's going to work with lots of people if a bunch of people unmute, so if that happens and it gets noisy, I'll mute everybody, but those are a couple ways to participate in here. So as far as some chats, let me just see what's coming in on the chat line so far.
Okay.
Hang on one second, Doctor. Is that working here?
Yeah, actually, while you're sort of gathering the chat lines, maybe I'll give you guys a little bit of background. So I'm a MD PhD, as mentioned. I actually active viral researcher at Columbia. And I guess I've actually been involved in product development before. I was on the team that developed denosumab or Prolia for Amgen. And I actually have a PhD in immunology, so I know there's a focus on vaccines, so I can comment on that. I saw the sort of report out of Israel, which, I think when doctors told me, hey, it looks like they'll have a vaccine in a few weeks or months, I was like, are you a doctor or a politician? Because, when you look at drug development, and I'm actually part of the group working with David Ho at Columbia, is small molecule inhibitors is a much faster timeline to getting efficacy. You can use them in vitro systems. You can find out which molecule has the best efficacy. You can quickly move quickly, being realistic by quickly. You can move through animal trials and into human trials. And, David Ho has basically been pretty public about that's a 1-year timeline. Actually, a good friend of mine, I'll say, a co-author on a couple of books together, Peter Hotez, has been working on vaccines for this for actually quite a while, and then sort of, funding shut down because no one was worried about SARS-type coronaviruses. And that's a much longer process because first you have to demonstrate that you could actually get effective antibodies. And so you've got to actually have in hand something that will produce neutralizing antibodies. And then you need to test those neutralizing antibodies actually against live virus. And in this case, this is a biosafety level 3 virus. So those viral inactivation, which are actually viral plaque assays, are going to have to all be done by a limited number of personnel in a BSL, biosafety level 3 lab. Once you know that you can get those effective antibodies, which take actually 3 to 4 weeks to generate because it's an IgG, and it just takes that amount of time even once you put the vaccine in a person. So there's 4 weeks from injection till you get the antibodies. Then there's the plaque assays to see if they neutralize. Then there's the safety and efficacy trials about, is it 1 dose, is it 2 doses? So the optimists in the crowd are saying that's 18 months away.
Wow.
So if that answers people's questions just going into this.
I've got several questions came in the chat line. How does this, what is the likely hospitalization rate, the need for respirator rate for children and for people in the different age ranges?
Yeah. So, everyone just quotes that big number. So the big number is 80% stay in the community, 15% end up sick enough to be in the hospital, 2.5 end up on a ventilator and survive, 2.5 end up on a ventilator and die, and there's a little bit of wiggle either way in different countries. South Korea did great. China seems to have done pretty well. Italy, it's not going well. Here, it's too early to tell. But there's clearly a curve based upon age and comorbidities. So, as I say, we have yet to see a death in a child under 9, and then people respond back, yes, that means 9-year-olds and teenagers are dying, yes, but at a very low rate. If you're a healthy 80-year-old, your chance of dying is 14.8%, to quote the number from a big study. Your chance of dying if you're under the age of 20 is probably 0.1. So the impact on children is much lower in terms of mortality, but we are seeing kids already in the US get sick. We're already actually hospitalizing kids at, I won't mention which facility, but at several. And I like to point out that everyone says, 80% of people are going to be just fine. Actually, 80% of people are going to experience this, I say, at a psychological panic level. They may never end up sick enough to go into the hospital, but they're the ones that are sort of hammering, saying like, well, what can I take to keep me safe? So just giving all those numbers.
Okay, I've got several questions. One, if we can just run through them super quick here on each one. One question is how long does the virus really live on surfaces? A lot of rumors about that.
Yeah. So we haven't done studies with this particular virus, right? Because again, it's a biosafety level 3 virus, and you have to be limited in who works on it, where, and when. And so we basically used other coronaviruses, in the same family. It's actually subfamilies. And so this is in the beta coronavirus subfamily. So we've looked at those, and the data is 9 days. So it can, and survive, we'll say, it can remain infectious for 9 days. And that's not just, I can still pick up the genetic material, which could be, from roadkill. This is 9 days on surfaces. You can actually have infectious virus.
Wow. All right.
Thank
you for answering that one. And I'll share some data I've got on age mortality rates that seem in line with what you said a little bit later in the call. What's the population? Okay. Understand the need to flatten the curve. Is there the time frame after which quarantine will damage the economy? Okay, that's an economics question. Well, is there a point in time where you envision that this is going to hit the bottom and return, or we hit the peak and it gets better? Any sense of how long that's going to take in this country for us to hit that end point or that bottom point?
Yeah, definitely. Early on there was a lot of optimism about like, maybe this will be just like the flu, maybe it'll be just like a winter virus, maybe as we get into more UV and warmer weather. And it's not the temperature, it's the UV, and the angle of the sun and the impact on the virus through DNA damage. But we are seeing this virus doing quite well in the southern hemisphere, in the tropics. So most of that optimism has been impacted in a negative way, to put it mildly. So we're actually looking at months. I think we're going into months, and we're not, the optimism that we'd have a summer lull. followed by potentially something bad in the fall. This looks like it's just going to keep going for months.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The rumor that vitamin D can help be protective, is it rumor or any truth to that?
Yeah, so that's that's what we're running into right now. We have basically, you have these one-liners out of China, right? And I try to read, and basically they don't show you the data, and they just say, in a reassuring manner, this, drug X, treatment X has shown efficacy, and then they don't actually show you the science behind it. And so, what kind of efficacy are they talking about? Is there any scientific certainty there? I think there's a desperation now that I need to grab something and see if it works. And my warning would be, early on, they said, a lot of the mortality, morbidity is this incredible inflammatory response. So they gave people steroids and they doubled the mortality. At one point, they gave NSAIDs that also increased the mortality. Now they've got a whole bunch of other things that everyone is trying. And at this point, we not only are we lacking anything with any demonstrated and anything with any sort of significant efficacy, we also don't have anything that we know is safe and won't increase mortality.
Wow. All right, this is pretty
So
real
I think
deal.
that's.
All right, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to move on the agenda here. Really appreciate you stepping away from your patients and what you got at Ground Zero there in New York. And
All
thank
right.
you so much, Dr. Griffin, and thanks, Adam.
Hey, hopefully I was helpful, and thanks.
Yeah, this was terrific.
Okay, bye.
All right, great, thanks. All right, so let me go ahead and get back. Aaron, I've turned host control over to you. The next speaker is going to be Josh Greenberg. So Josh, you may want to get yourself unmuted right now.
Okay.
Again, folks, here's the agenda. It's really bringing together our GSB classmates and other executives and experts to crowdsource the best insights, how we're going to navigate this crisis. And this is the agenda here. We just heard from Dr. Fiterstein and Dr. Griffin in New York, Josh Greenberg, classmate in 2000, CEO of Team. Will tell us what's going on there. We've got Dr. Milana Boukhman Trounce, David Trounce, class of 2001's wife. She's a GSB 08, also a Harvard MD and a professor at Stanford of emergency medicine and chair of biosecurity. Scott Beckmeyer is not actually on the call, but he provides something that will be, I think, valuable for folks. And I'm going to share on my side some of the insights and some interesting visualizations of what's happening that not really seen in the press. Alan Zaffron is Stanford 86. He's on the call. Will be presenting on an economic market outlook, where this might go. Abe Smith with Zoom. Eric Yuan, CEO, told me on Friday night that he's fully booked at this time, which is a pattern I'm seeing with I've talked to about a dozen CEOs this weekend, and almost every one of them is just fully slammed, trying to get through this. And it's a miracle we've got the people we have here. Tai Harpster, GSBOO, is going to talk about his magnetics company and supply chain. And then Tony is going to be talking at the end about some legal perspectives. So with that, Josh, are you on? Can we hear you?
I am on. Hi.
Okay, great. So let me move over to you. Josh doesn't have slides. He's got a hard stop in a few minutes. Why don't you tell us a little background about what Team is doing and what you're doing.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. And it's good to connect with some of my classmates. Although I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. And I want to start by not thanking you for this call. The sobering start like that is not the stress that I needed to add to the mix, Jason. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
I'm joking, of course. I think the more information, the better. I appreciate everyone taking the time to come up to speed. I want to give the massive caveat that I claim no expertise here. We're just scrambling like everyone else. Jason did feel I might have some perspective that could be interesting in the group, just because we are on the front lines. We manage service that cares for people with disabilities, or people caring for a loved one in a home-based setting. We have about 20,000 families we take care of in all 50 states. And we do that through a workforce of about 35,000 people across the country. So there's a bit of a footprint we're managing. I'd say, given that we've got a bunch of leaders on this call and people making a lot of the same decisions that we're making, I'll just quickly cover the corporate side of our business, because I know everyone's scrambling on that at the same time. We tried to get ahead of this as quickly as possible and started moving to work from home. Social distancing, I know we'll talk about flattening the curve later in this call, or at least the rest of you will. I just appreciate everyone's efforts in doing what we can to just keep this stress off the healthcare system, because we're seeing some of the stress at the front line in the home care setting already starting to surface. So from a corporate perspective, the couple things that we're doing to lean in is just obviously, work travel's gone. We're getting people out of the office. We're social distancing. I know for some people, closing an office seems incredibly unreasonable, but I think my understanding is just at least getting fewer people in the office setting can be helpful. So anything can be done on that front from a societal perspective is appreciated. We also are leaning in on some of our HR policies, sick time, et cetera, just being super clear, keeping people without infection away. And we're actually moving this week towards taking temperature at some of our worksite locations. On the field perspective, we're also on the front line. So we just do not have the option of hunkering down and telecommuting and doing everything over Zoom, although I love this service. But we're out there. We're providing needed care in the community. And it's a difficult experience. We've got people going into some scary situations. So there's a lot of coordination with the federal authorities, state health departments, trying to figure out what we can and can't do. Infection control protocols are in place, but we're already seeing across the country, not just in our business, but in other folks, a shortage of PPE, personal protective equipment. So this is people kind of hoarding masks and so on. We're working on kind of national supply chain across our company to make sure that any shortages can be facilitated through other companies. So it's a shout out to any of you that might have stuff hanging around your basement or know of other supply chain options for us. Everyone's kind of scrambling on the front to make sure everyone on the front line is protected. We're coordinating a lot with the federal authorities. That's a really interesting area. Part of our desire with at-risk population is just limiting infection as best we can. One of the interesting things we're seeing across the country is just the rapid time changes. We work with regulatory authorities that move at a pretty modest pace for obvious reasons. They're accelerating. I mean, I think a piece of good news is that people are taking this seriously and moving more quickly than we would have otherwise expected. We're doing things like working with authorities to figure out if anything that we would normally have to do in a home-based setting or in a personal setting, we can do remotely. And it's a heavy lift, but we're trying to do that just because we think anything we can do to limit exposure would be important. And then the final thing I'll say, and I'll leave it to other experts on this call to opine more greatly, is we work with an at-risk population, both from a health perspective, but also from just socioeconomic and income. And I think one of the things I'm concerned about is just the effort that everyone's making. So I just want to shout out to everyone that's making Herculean efforts to keep your workforce deployed and working. Social determinants of health is a huge driver of healthcare, not only with this current pandemic, but just in general right now. And so one of my concerns is that this labors on with the economy. We could see a lot of people struggling at the lower end of the income stream. So a big thanks for everyone who's continuing to work and keep the lights on. And Jason, I do have to run to my task call, but I'm happy to take any questions if you want.
Josh, for time, I think we're going to move on to Dr. Boukhman Trounce. Thank you so much for joining. Good luck with all you got on your shoulders. Okay, Dr. Milana Boukhman is on next. And are you unmuted at this point?
I am, I think.
Okay, good. Thank you again, Josh. We're going to move over to Dr. Boukhman Trounce, David Trounce's wife. Maybe you may have met her already. Her bio speaks for itself. Amazing background. Thrilled to have you on the call here. I've got 8 minutes for you to share whatever you think is relevant to share. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me on the call. And I can just run through some of the information that I hope you might find useful, and feel free to ask me any questions. So just by way of background, I'm an ER doc, and just worked a shift yesterday, so I can tell you a little bit what it's like right now. And I'm also have just finished teaching a biosecurity class at Stanford, which is basically focused on exploring solutions to biosecurity threats, which definitely includes pandemics at the intersections of technology, policy, and healthcare sectors. So basically in the, we're seeing that it's definitely older people are affected, but I would say it's not exclusively so. There are some people we're seeing in the ER that are more in their 40s. We're also, like I worked a shift yesterday, it's been busier for a Sunday shift than we've normally seen. And it's already certainly significantly impacting hospital operations and capacity. since it slows things down and requires more resources and change in protocols, and it affects where we put people. One word of reassurance, kids under 10, like was mentioned before, don't die, but they bring it to people who do. So the closure of schools, I know there's a lot of debate about that. Schools are being closed. Basically, kids are vectors. We will, like mentioned, we will not have a vaccine for at least a year or 18 months at best. There may be some hope for drugs, not the new drugs, but there are a number of trials on where we're using, we're trying to figure out whether existing drugs can work for this. There are a number of innovative kind of healthcare models that are being tried. For example, at Stanford, we're trying, we're actually have started a drive-through testing through Stanford Express Care. And actually, Stanford Lab has a capacity to run somewhere between 200 to 300 tests per day, and it's going to ramp up to about 1,000 in a few days. At this point, I think we're past containment, but it is very important to flatten the epidemic curve and essentially try to reduce the number of people who are affected with this all at the same time, essentially to try to reduce the demands on the healthcare system. And we've talked about mortality rates. Yes, official stats is about 2%. What's interesting is that we've seen with South Korea mortality rates, it's somewhere more about 0.7%. In Italy, it's more like 4 to 5%. Of course, you know, some of it depends on who's getting tested. You know, in South Korea, people are testing very widely. In Iran, you know, which is reporting mortality rates of 45%, they're not testing as widely, but also a lot of it has to do with a mortality rate if there is treatment versus if there is no treatment. For example, if their healthcare system is overwhelmed, like in Italy, and they run out of ventilators, we can't put on the people on vents, they're gonna die. That's another reason why you're seeing higher mortality rate in Italy versus South Korea. So we're past containment, probably, in my opinion, I think probably half of the people in the US will get infected. We are, we're probably where Italy was a couple of weeks ago. So a lot of people will die. Death varies massively by age. Like I said, was mentioned before, over 80 people, the mortality rate is about 10 to 15%. Under 10, kids don't die. It's probably going to stay with us. I don't think it's going to be a few months. I think it's going to be more like a year to 18 months. But I do hope, there is still some hope, I think, of things slowing down a bit in the summer, but not going away. I think definitely things are going to go get worse before they get better. And again, we're going to be dealing with this at least for a year.
Milana,
yes.
Can you take a few questions in the next 2 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
And are you going to be on the call for the rest of till 9:15?
I will, yes.
Okay, because there may be some points where it'd be great to have your expertise on some slides coming up. So one question is, do you expect that the U.S. is going to do a full lockdown? And if so, that, you know, varying degrees of connotations that what that might look like based on, you know, what you're hearing, what you're
Well, based on what I'm hearing, I mean, the thing is, full lockdown, I don't think will help us much. They might still do it. I think from an epidemiological standpoint, you know, it might slow things down by a day, but I don't think it's going to be that helpful. I wouldn't exclude that some states might try to close borders, might try to quarantine, but frankly, that's not realistic to do. And I think a lot of states realize it. Then enforcing quarantines is more difficult. Having said that, we are looking at kind of more aggressive. You know, I know CDC is setting up quarantine facilities even around where we are, where it's not full lockdown, but it's kind of basically you can leave from those facilities for a couple of weeks.
Okay. So when a question is, when you say 60-70% spread on previous doctor, you're saying about 50%. Does that mean of the entire population? 50
Correct.
to 70% of the population will get it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that, yeah, I think so, yeah.
How many respirators are there in this country? I heard a rumor there's like just 100 or 200,000 respirators in total.
I can't tell you the number off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up.
Okay, that's a number that my wife picked up, and if that's the case, it seems like we're gonna have a quite a problem here.
Yeah. All I
When,
can tell you is that, we're lean, and this is definitely going to exceed uh, how much we use as respirators by several times at least. So,
okay.
you
Does
know,
another question is being outside direct sunlight, does that kill the virus in any capacity?
correct. Yes, UV helps. Yeah,
Okay.
UV. So, yeah, there are several things. So, actually, the humidity. So, there is evidence actually with SARS. We don't know with COVID-19, but there's pretty good data about SARS where actually air conditioner broke in one of the hospital wings, and then that wing had significantly lower transmission due to higher humidity and higher temperatures,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
also UV light kills it.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you. Um, so I will check this next question. Oh, also, I've heard that zinc is also something that can help people deal with this immune systems. Is that, you know,
There's
a lot?
no good data. I mean, it's just generally immune. Some people
Okay,
take it.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, um, good, very good. So I think we've hit the time for your topic here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the next person. Well, Scott Beckmeyer is not on here, but he's the chairman of Pre-Diversified, which is about 7 different high-tech manufacturing companies. And he shared this with me. I call it open source. Basically, if your company has not put in place some type of policy guidelines how to deal with this, he said, feel free to use this, copy paste, however you want to do it. And I'll just encourage you to just take a look at it. This material will be made available uh, by tomorrow, Tuesday. Um, in source, so you're welcome to use it in whatever way it's helpful. He basically is saying this out. This is an evolving draft, so I'm sure the version he has by the end of the day will be a little bit different. But he's issued this out to his various operating companies. So a lot of it's common sense, but there's also, I feel, a bit of wisdom and um, humanity behind what's being said here. About you know work working remotely, kids at home, um, being generous about enabling employees to care for their families, um, and making sure you have a plan for this. Um, Having a hotline for your employees that people can call. Um, Obviously, boosting telemeeting infrastructure, which we'll hear from Zoom in a minute about that. Conserving cash, and then also he had something here about working collaboratively with your friendly competitors to help deal with supply chain. I'm not sure if this is on this page. I think it's on the next page. So some really good wisdom in here. I will share this again. These are 2 of the operating companies under Pre-Diversified, several others. Scott lives here in the Bay Area. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and present a few things as well. Check on time, how we're doing here. It's 8:34, running about 4 minutes late. We'll probably go to about 9:15 on this call. Hope that's okay with people. What I want to share are some statistical visualizations. I've been working with Alan Gray, class of 2000. Those of you in that class know Alan. He sends his regards. Um, I joined End-to-End Analytics. I'm a principal there. We do applied data science and big data work to help companies improve their operations, supply chains, inventory, marketing, and profitability. A lot of fun. We do all kinds of deep technical work, software programming, and applying all kinds of data, you know, concepts and big data work in an operational setting with some really impressive clients. The goal here, you've seen this slide a couple times that we have, is to push out this curve so that the healthcare system can handle it. And the reality is that we are not doing too well, as you're hearing. I'm going to share some stats. And Milana, if you can, if you have any comments, please,
Okay.
speak up at any time about some of the slides I'll share in a moment. But this is the Johns Hopkins website that a lot of people are using. This is a logarithmic plot which with a log plot on an exponential phenomenon, you basically can look at a straight line, plot out what's the linear shape here to see what the exponential daily expansion is of this disease. This was China, and they've really clamped down in ways that only China can do because the way their government is structured and their policies. I'm afraid I'm not sure that we're going to see that in many other places. Singapore has done a reasonable good job. Taiwan has actually done a pretty good job, and South Korea is starting to get a handle on it. Green is recoveries, and yellow is the rest of the world. And as of yesterday, the rest of the world cases have surpassed that of China. So it is unleashed. The rate is pretty strong about where they were in early February. And the concern I have in the US is this is some numbers I put together with the Johns Hopkins data. I've been collecting each day and doing country by country analysis. And we've got the US in blue on a log chart. You can see the slope of our growth and compare that to Italy. We are 10 days behind Italy by total cases. We've got 6 times the population. When you work that backwards, we're actually 17 days behind on a per capita basis where Italy is. And there are hotspots like California is a little bit worse than the average, which means a little bit less, maybe 15 or 16 days in some states. We are growing at 1.3x per day, which means 6 times growth per week. And we're at 4,000 cases this morning. And that's based on limited test kits. I would imagine the number is actually in reality a lot more. Milana, what can you say about test kits being able to meet demand at this point, and where do you see that likely to be 2 weeks from now?
I think basically not enough. So CDC is saying they can do 1,000 a day or something, actually a little bit more. Actually, Stanford is going to be able to do 1,000 to 2,000 a day. I know the Quest Corp and LabForm and a couple of other companies, I think the total, they just got approval for their tests fairly recently, on the order of like 1,000 to 2,000 a day. Helpful, but not enough.
Okay, so it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Aaron, if you can make sure that Alan Zaffron's voice is unmuted, because he's going to be out in a couple minutes here. All right. So anyway, this is what's happening. We are following Italy, as many countries are. When we look at it on a per country basis, again, this is off the Johns Hopkins data. After accumulating this and doing some stats on it, our daily expansion rate, so 1.3 means, 1,000 people on one day, the next day, 1,300 people. That's what that means, all right? We have 0.001% of the population has an infection, which seems like a really small number, and it is. If you compare to other countries, we're actually doing a good bit better. I think our numbers probably in practice higher than this, maybe double that. I don't really know. But you can see other countries' expansion rate, and this is over about a 2-week period. So it's a pretty realistic number. We're not even as bad as many countries in Europe. You can see Italy has gotten better as they've gone to lockdown. Their number was higher a couple weeks ago on a rolling basis. Iran, I don't know if I can trust those numbers. So this is where we are at this point in time.
I would say, I would say the infection rate, we have no idea because we're not testing. So just that caveat. South Korea, they're testing everybody. In the US, we literally just started testing those who are, anyway, these numbers are very limited, I would say.
Yeah. All right. And those are just based on known cases. I think the average delay from onset of the disease to actually people feeling symptoms is 5.2 days from things I've read. So any number you see today that has tests basis is probably, multiply 1.3 to the power of 5 and backtrack that to the number that's published. That's probably what's actually out there in reality.
Yeah, that sounds.
Okay. These are mortality rates from China, taken about a week ago from them, and actually shows a lot more detail of what's happening by city. What's interesting is their mortality rate in Hubei province was very high because it was out of control. When you look at Shandong and everything other than Hubei from here down, that mortality rate's been 1.5% if you believe those numbers. And then the smaller provinces are a higher rate. Now, one of my friends who gave me this site, she's Chinese, her dad's in the government there in China, was explaining that the places where you see the higher rates are actually the poor provinces where the medical care is not as good. So it does correlate with the level of wealth and medical systems. And these are case mortality rates from a article that I got by age range. So that can give you some sense of where that is. This is the number, actually nails what Dr. Griffin said. He said 14.8%. Maybe we were quoting from the same source. I don't know. He's spoken on Fox News, CNN, and a number of other media in the last couple weeks. So he might have been the one that generated these numbers, and we're just reading about it. The guy is pretty well established. I won't go into much time on this, but there's a great video that explains some aspects about isolation versus travel. Travel lockdowns, as Milana was saying, are not going to make much difference. This video explains why, and gives a little bit of understanding of the theory behind it, which we don't have time for on this call. Let me share, we in our company do a lot of interesting things with data. We have one member that's been tracking and preserving flight data for all airplanes globally for the last year and a half on a 1.5 terabyte BigQuery database. He's run some Python scripts. We were working on this last night, and he put this together for us. I'm going to go through a few shots here. So China, airline travel, domestic in green, international flights in and out. This is the pattern from January through February through early March. It dropped by 80%. It's started to recover. Both those numbers were down about 80%. The international numbers have still not recovered into and out of China. Cargo, we're seeing this trend. What this tells me is it's down 50%. What this tells me is that normally Chinese New Year, factories have about a 2 to 3 week period of outage. This year, this tells me that factories don't yet have the ability to replenish inventory, and cargo flights are not able to get enough business to actually make sense to fly. That's what that number tells me. When we look globally, Asia to USA flights are down 35% between US and Asia. When we look at a proxy of all Boeing and Airbus airplanes that are in the air, on the ground worldwide, these two companies here, we can see that number is down about 25%. So that's cargo globally, which is probably brought down primarily by the Asia number, because US to Europe is pretty much stable. We are seeing, with Trump's new rules, maybe that's a new signal. And then in Italy, you can see what was happening there in terms of international flights in red and blue versus domestic. It's plummeted down by 90% as they've gone to lockdown. In the US, we're actually at this point still okay. FedEx, UPS flights, these are stable. These are week over week gyrations that you see that go down. That's normal. So I think we're okay in the US at this moment, but that's likely to change. I'm going to pass the baton over to Alan Zafran. He's a Stanford 86. Forgive, he's not a Stanford GSB guy. He's a Harvard Business School guy. Nonetheless, I think he's awesome. Some of you may have heard him on Bloomberg Markets Radio. Alan, are you with us? Can you speak?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Jason?
Yeah, I've got all your slides here, so when you're ready for me to.
All right, I'm not even focused on the slides. Let me start by saying I'm humbled by everyone who went before me on the call, Doctors Griffin and Fiterstein, and I just, as well as Milana, and my heart goes out to everybody. And this is a really human toll more than an economic toll, so that comes first and foremost, which is why events that are now unfolding have significant adverse economic consequences, but those economic consequences are secondary to the human toll, and so I think we have to keep it all in perspective. What I would tell you, rather than walk through the slides for a minute, I'm going to give you a little perspective. And I think this is the Wall Street perspective right now, and based on what I just heard, if anything, the Wall Street perspective is probably too optimistic, which scares me a bit based on what I just heard. But there was a conference call hosted by Goldman Sachs yesterday, for example, And they're of the belief that this is more an alignment with a crash, kind of like 9/11 or the 1987 crash, than the pronounced 2008 18-month recession. And really, if you're just going to, for a minute, talk about the economic consequences of this event and what the implications are for the financial markets, you have to come to grips with a simple question. This too shall pass, but how long before it will pass? If you believe this is what I'll call an event shock, a one-off out of the blue that is measurable, ultimately is contained, and there's enough fiscal as well as monetary response from the politicians globally to economically deal with the economic damage, just as rapidly as this falls, we will actually see a recovery, potentially by the fourth quarter of this year, if not sooner. Conversely, if you believe that there's lasting economic damage and small business owners who are indebted can't get their way out of lost revenues, and we've created a global recession of significant duration, the stock market not only is going to fall, but it isn't going to go anywhere for a while. And so you really have to come to grips with the unknown. The unknown is whether or not this is a confined event shock where events will take place both medically and politically to address the problem enough to appease the financial markets. And if those two things don't work out well enough, this will end up being a much more protracted recession than anybody on this call would like to hear. So to take that call as an example, Goldman claimed that in their mind, 50% of Americans, about 150 million people, are going to contract the virus because it's very communicable. And they thought that's completely on par with the common cold. They claim that 70% of Germans are actually going to get it, which is probably the next most relevant industrial economy. So Europe obviously is kind of the epicenter right now of this. According to Goldman, this is one of the key things, maybe I'd be interested to throw it back to Milana after I speak. They think the virus is probably going to peak over the next 8 weeks or so, and they think it declines thereafter. And that's probably the big debate. They think that the virus appears to be concentrated in a band between 30 to 50 degrees north latitude, which is kind of like with the common cold and flu. It prefers colder weather. There's a belief, I think, on Wall Street that the coming summer in the northern hemisphere is going to help, which is to say the virus is likely seasonal, which is contrasting what I think I'm hearing on this call from the medical professionals. They have the exact same numbers. 80% of people are impacted. It's early stage, you get through it. 15% of people, it's mid stage and it's not pleasant, but you get through it. 5 people are critical stage. And of those that are critical stage, those that tend to be in poor health or older tend to have a much higher mortality rate. The mortality rate they think is somewhere around 2% along the way, and you can do the math and conclude what that means for the American population that could be harmed. And I don't want to make light of this, but if you went through the U.S. population and it was, if 2% were ultimately passed from this, and it was weighted towards the elderly or the immunocompromised, which means up to about 3 million people if you do the math. They believe that 3 million people in the U.S. die almost every year due to old age and disease. So they actually think, to some degree, that's pretty highly correlated. So they think there's actually some overlap from the two. I'm not trying to make light of it. That's just a perspective I've heard. But they also acknowledge the stress on the healthcare system is unprecedented. So flattening the curve makes a lot of sense. They go on to say that China's economy, which has been largely impacted, it's obviously now affecting raw materials in the global supply chain. That's going to take 6 months or more to recover, not quick. Global GDP's growth rate this year is going to be around 2%. If that's true, that'll be the lowest rate of growth globally in 30 years. They believe you're going to see the earnings growth drop 15 to 20% for this calendar year. It's a major hit to, if you just kept price earnings ratios the same, you'd say the stock market would fall 15 or 20%. And then you would further discount how far the market might fall by virtue of the degree of uncertainty about what remains going forward. Now, the real issue is, for them, is the economic damage from the virus itself, or not? And the answer is the human toll is from the virus, but the real damage economically is as much or more driven by market psychology. They have a view that this is an event-driven shock and that stock markets actually will fully recover in the second half of the year.
Alan,
that's their view.
This is the picture from that you sent from Deutsche Bank, I believe. This was taken on March 2nd before things got really out of control.
Yeah, so as an example, you would drop that now to 5% drop. For a sewer that's going to a 2% drop, you'd say GDP would drop down to 5%. Down here in the blip in the second quarter of 2020.
Okay, so way below.
The data is changing. The data is changing daily. That's the reality of it.
Okay.
What's made matters worse in the stock markets is you've had the conflation of the impact of the virus along with the developing oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia, and so you've got reduced energy prices, which would normally be good for industrial economies, but now the U.S. is a large energy exporter, so that just puts even further pressures on U.S. businesses, which could have ancillary effects on banks that make loans to those kinds of companies. So that's going to be an issue. And you could argue technically the stock market's been generally looking for a reason to reset after what was the longest bull market in history of 11 years. So the silver lining as far as Wall Street is concerned for now is this is not a systemic risk issue, unlike 2008. No one is talking about the banks defaulting. And governments are actively engaged in the markets aiming to stabilize them. And the private banking sector is pretty well capitalized. So if you take that into account, again, one last time, without diminishing at all the horrible human toll here, from a purely economic perspective, it does not feel as if the financial system is at risk systemically. The Fed has already reacted to infuse capital to keep the markets liquid. The market is now looking for a massive fiscal response from the government. That will take weeks to put together, and the Democrats and Republicans have discordant political objectives and views. The belief is the market will fall to the point it forces the Democrats and Republicans to come to the table together. The faster the markets fall, the faster eventually a fiscal policy package comes together. You probably need something that the belief is it amounts to about $1 trillion in value to really be impactful. Something less will probably just disappoint the market.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. We're for the sake of time, then need to move on to our next speaker, which is Abe Smith. Although, really, thank you, Alan. I went through your slides a little bit as we're going. I know you're just speaking as you do so eloquently about what's really going on. This will be available after the call as well. Well, I wish we could spend 15 more minutes asking questions because this is very interesting, Alan. If you want to stay on the line to the end, we may have an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to pull this over to Abe. Abe, I know you know how to use Zoom, so you've got the floor. I will move the slides forward.
I'll let you drive. I'll let you drive if you don't mind, Jason. Okay. I'll jump in real quick.
Yeah,
First of all,
let me introduce you if you don't mind. Abe and I have
please.
known each other for, 15, 20 years, a long time. Eric Yuan, he's also a very good friend of mine. He told me that he just couldn't make this morning because he's fully booked. As you can imagine, a lot going on. He asked Abe to represent Zoom and some perspectives. Abe stands on his own, a man with some great fortitude and perspective. So go ahead and tell us what you got.
Thanks, Jason. Look, in light of, hopefully everybody can hear me clearly, but in light of the conversations that have gone on earlier so far on this call, this is probably the least important part of the presentation, but probably relevant just as it relates to business continuity. And I'll briefly go through just how Zoom is reacting and a little bit of best practices around it. So, as Jason said, we're trying to do our part. Zoom is a video first product. It's a web-based video product that we're using today. Everybody's experiencing right now. We reacted in the post that you just saw a second ago, which is our blog post that we put out on February 28th. And it's directly from Eric, who believes that our first obligation in all of this is around community. But it's fair to say that it's amazing to see everybody step up. So whether it's Cisco WebEx or Microsoft with a Teams product or Google whether hangouts, meets, product, and so forth. There's been a community effort for everybody to say, number one is how do we get a service like this out? Because the way people are going to work, the way people need to educate their kids, the way telemedicine needs to operate, needs continuity. And that requires all of us working together. Next slide, if you will.
Okay. Also,
so,
if I may add, a company called VHT CX. VHT CX has a the inventor of the callback system. So hospitals and service providers that are trying to deal with the onslaught can use them to enable people to call. And when you call airline, it will call you back because there's too many people on the line. So they've also got a program similar to these programs that people are offering for free to make businesses that need that type of capability come back. All right, back to you, Abe.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so we provided our services. We always provide our services for free. So our product has always been free in the market, and it's easy to use and high quality, which has made it very adaptable. We've done some extra effort things like a lot of others in the market have. From the beginning, going back to December, we were starting to see blips of this in the media, and that's what we look at. We look at leading indicators in our company, like the media, which you're seeing here, and just the reports. This is a recent just snapshot of what's happening in terms of daily impressions in the media. And then we also look for, next slide, Jason, if you don't mind, just what's happening with our products. So we start to see a lot of virility in places around the globe. Quickly, we started to shoot up as we had been, but really to the top of the charts around downloads. So when we look at people downloading the free accounts, it gives an indication of just where this has started to spiral up and why people are needing it more and more. Places like Saudi Arabia, obviously in Japan, and so forth. Now, the implications we've seen at a positive level is that governments have rallied around this as well. So, places like the UAE, where they have blocked voice over IP related products, have now been opened up. Companies like HSBCs you're seeing here have then very quickly deployed this to 290,000 employees. So that kind of speed and support from governments and corporations has been impressive. You can go to the next slide, Jay. If you don't mind, Jason, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Oops. Next slide. There you go. And then just the outpouring of just how we can react. I'd say that's one key here for everybody is just be responsive. We've tried to be as quick and responsive. I'm up 24 hours a day. Most people in our company are right now, almost like a Red Cross kind of team. You can go to the next slide. So, just quickly as a case study of how we've mobilized, I think we're a good example of how to do this. As schools closed, as people were asked to work from home, next slide, which includes our business, we closed immediately. We made a move to have all of our offices closed. I think that's a general theme right now. What that means, though, you can go to the next slide, as you get people to work from home, we immediately started using the tool. So, using remote access tools like this. This is our executive meeting where we meet regularly just to discuss as a team. You still have to communicate, whether that's through a conference call like this or a video call or otherwise. Next slide. Jace, thank you. We started to do a best practice around a consolidation of the key information on a sales and corporate level of what's going on a weekly level. So every week we publish a report that we push out to the team. We do this as a standing meeting as well, so everybody can get a consolidated, almost cliff note view of what's happening. And then just Jason asked to say, from a sales perspective, how do you maintain sales continuity and continuation when everybody's in a bit of a panic? Our best practices have been put into place for ourselves. Like, we're highly communicative with all core clients and prospects and partners. We're asking that we still focus on our key accounts and our key customers with regular meetings and top leaders. It's always been our approach. In our case, we have a high volume inbound. So our first priority is reactive first and then proactive second. And then staying aligned with our outbound teams, because obviously there's a lot of need for communication on a real-time basis. Probably most importantly, as you think about work from home, is just keep everybody organized. I mean, this is a whole shift. As everybody moves from an office setting to their home,
okay,
we do regular stand-ups every morning and afternoon, and then just keep the priorities very clear. Yep, there you go. That's 8 minutes or less. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, doke. Thank you very much.
And I've got to jump off, Jason.
Okay.
I've got to jump off. So thanks, everybody.
Slide. Wasn't there one more slide about what people can do?
Yeah, there was. You have to refresh the deck, and it should be in there. But thanks, everybody. Let me know if I can help in any way. Please, feel free to call on us. Thank you.
Let me just
Bye-bye.
refresh here. bear with me while I refresh you that last slide. Thanks for joining, Abe. He's been flat out the whole weekend, and every time I've called him, it's been like a 2-second conversation. All right, the next person on is going to be Tai Harpster, class of 2000. There we go. That's the slide I was looking for. Okay, super. So if you need help, contact Abe. All right, Tai, can you hear me? Can we hear you?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Good morning. Good, good. So got a few minutes.
Yep. I'll be brief. So we focus really on the manufacturing distribution side, kind of a specialty space, but we do deal with China quite a bit. And so we actually were involved with this from the drop. We've been involved six plus weeks on the supply chain side. And obviously it's given us exposure and the ability to, we went remote 2 weeks ago with our non-essential staff. We have in-house manufacturing and distribution that's gone to very extensive PPE processes that we're following still to this day. But I think it's important to look at what's happened in China. It doesn't necessarily correlate to a direct situation where we're going to see it in the United States the same way. But what happened in China is going to lead to some economic impact over here, significant at this point, due to things like the timing of it. Lunar New Year happened at the exact same time you had COVID dropping, when you also had local economic expansion, which means places in China were able to employ people closer to home as opposed to having to go away as they used to. And every year that's been growing and growing and growing. The material levels that are on site in China prior to this event were already at the lowest point of the year because of their tendency to only carry what they need based on a cash payment process that they use. So there's very little to restart with. And then of course, the biggest problem in China was the transportation from point to point. Most provinces shut down traffic between ports, between distribution centers, and it didn't resume for 3 to 4 weeks. And then that's back to your slides, Jason, earlier. That's reflected as just the amount of material in the system is extremely low. Manufacturing claims right now are anywhere between 50 to 60% of their capacity is back, but because of the material decline, you're only looking at 30 to 40% of material flowing. And then you've got the shipments themselves, which are, air is the first thing that's picking up. We're receiving product, we're able to get to our customers' immediate need. But as far as the bulk of what we're looking at, volumes remain extremely low. And then of course, back to some of the different things we've seen on the financial side, if the demand curve flattens out in the United States over the next 3 to 6 months, then you're going to see, even more of the same kind of going forward. Probably most relevant as we move to the next slide is just kind of what's going to happen here in the United States, right? On a manufacturing distribution basis, we're not huge. We have less than 50 team members, but we have to be concerned as most states are now moving to a less than or anyone greater than 50 people in the same space. So obviously work from home for non-essential. Those that are there have to follow really clear rules for hygiene and other. But what we're now starting to see is, are we going to get what we need, and are we going to be able to process it and get it out to customers? And I'll just skip right down to the transportation issue. You're not hearing any commentary about this. I think some of our classmates have worked in this industry more than certainly I have, but one of the things that's really, really concerning, as we saw with China, is the shutdown in kind of transfer, the ability to move things on the ground from point to point. In the United States, if we face any kind of interruption to an interstate trucking or delivery system, or even interstate for Amazon, other deliveries that you're doing right now, you have so much of this conversion right at this point on a consumer basis to using services like Amazon to mitigate, going out and getting product, that if any of those things occur, you're going to have a massive interruption to supply chains, which have a massive interruption to the general economy. And so our biggest concern in our business is that someone will determine that the leading vector for delivery of these possible viruses are people who are carrying the freight, who are moving things from point to point. And as a result, in China, they determined that's just can't happen. They shut it down. And that was a huge impact to the economy there. Fortunately, it looks like they're coming around quickly. If it happened here in the United States, obviously, we're not even talking about that. And that's our biggest concern, because that would just shut our business down entirely. Plus, our products are involved in respirators. Our products are involved in a lot of medical devices right now, aerospace, defense. So how does that then flow out of there? And it's just something as we're going through this first wave of analysis, just from a health basis, when you look at a true impact to the economy, this is a place that we're really actively trying to understand and figure out. And once we get to that piece, there's nothing we can do. Everything short of that, proactive, so on and so forth. But if we get to that place, we're extremely concerned.
Thank you very much, Ty. I'm comforted by some of the things I heard earlier in the conversation. I think Milana was saying that stopping the travel is not going to make a huge impact to this. Also, that video that I showed about exponential growth and the black piece on the screen also suggests that in my gut feeling is leadership in the country's by and large probably going to realize that stopping interstate trucking, see, once you want to get to cold zero like China's done, then you need to block it. But if that's not realistic to do all states at one time, you're just not going to get there. This disease is going to spread, and blocking the traffic interstate is not actually going to achieve the goals to get us free of this virus. Is the sense I'm getting from the various statistics I've seen and things I've heard from others on this call. But we'll see. We don't know. Thank you for sharing this, Dai. This is very insightful. And I want to turn this over to Tony Toronto. Tony, can we hear your voice? Are you on? Make sure Tony's available.
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and we've got 5 minutes. And I'm quite happy to have this call go a little past 9:15 if people want to have some other questions. If Milana is able to stay on a little longer, because there's a lot of questions to come up about that as well. Let's go ahead and jump into this. Let's keep this short though, just 3 or 4 minutes.
Terrific, Jason. I'll walk through here, I think, pretty quickly.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. And it's great to be hearing so much different feedback, and thank you for organizing this. Obviously, it'd be wonderful to be interacting on happier circumstances. I'm going to run through just a range of legal issues. In addition to managing our own business as a professional service firm, we're obviously facing a lot of different questions from clients. And they're dealing with issues across a variety of functional areas that I've listed here. This is, of course, just a subset, from labor issues to corporate issues, real estate finance, government contracts, securities, and more. In fact, I was just this morning reading the draft of the House bill, or reading the House bill that was actually the version of the bill that was passed by the House. And there's a whole series of issues embedded in there that relate to matters that affect labor, tax credits related to labor issues, and also issues that relate to potential government contracts for those of you that are in that sector or that have that as part of your customer base. There are also a whole bunch of industry-specific matters that relate to energy, healthcare, aerospace, biotech, hospitality, et cetera, that we're dealing with. And let me just touch on a couple notable examples here for you to be thinking about. So, for example, in the real estate sector, we're seeing questions about what if, for example, I own real estate and maybe I own a multi-tenant office building. What happens if someone tests positive for coronavirus in one of my buildings? What are the types of things I need to do? Well, for example, some of the analysis we have is that you actually do need to notify other tenants in the building. You need to ensure proper cleaning for your facilities, but you also need to protect privacy for the individuals. Well, what about also tenants that seek rent relief? And this can affect you regardless of the nature of what product type you have in real estate. But the answer is, in short, that it's the least specific as a practical matter, and we've compiled and reviewed a whole variety of leases in this respect. Generally, tenants do not have an ability to unilaterally lower rent. However, there are a variety of different doctrines, even outside the four corners of your lease, that they can invoke. So that can include impossibility, force majeure, frustration of purpose. There are a variety of different doctrines that can come up. And in fact, working with tenants may be necessary in many different situations for you. We're also seeing a variety of issues in our hospitality practice and that our clients are facing. One of them relate to with cancellation of events, what happens to deposits. Prior to government action terminating events above a certain size, the deposit risk probably fell on the customer or the client that was actually scheduling the event. But with the cancellation of those events, more often than not, based on different contracts we've reviewed and based on other principles, it looks like the risk actually flips to the hospitality provider in many cases. And in fact, those deposits probably revert on the basis of the venue not being able to provide the service as a matter of legal impossibility. So that's something to look at. We're also seeing, if you can, with respect to hospitality, some expanded versions of government commandeering of spaces. And this may be, depending on how things go, from what we heard earlier today with respect to healthcare and the number of beds, we may see an expansion of this in other states. In California already, Governor Newsom has invoked his authority to commandeer facilities to make it available for, to make hospitality facilities, and there's reportedly one hotel in the San Jose or Santa Clara area that has already been commandeered effectively for making beds available for high-risk exposure. So that has to be compensated, but the terms of that have yet to be fully determined. I suspect that to the extent this expands, we may see that expand in other jurisdictions as well beyond California. Government contractors, I want to mention in the government contracts practice, we're seeing some things of note to a variety of you, and this is just the terms of government contracts have some special provisions for you to be aware of and to be thinking about. So at a very high level, remember to communicate early with your contacts and to work out acceptable accommodations to the extent you have some challenges. You also need to make sure in the government contracts context to be particularly careful to document everything in writing. So when you work out an accommodation, document it. You also need to make sure to be providing notice with respect to various delay clauses. There are several different flavors of those depending on the nature of the government contract that you have.
Hey, Tony, just to make a note, I've got some people do want to ask Milana some more questions here at the end, so I'm going to ask you to wrap up in 1 minute, and we'll see if Milana can answer a few questions, all right?
Yeah, you got it. Also, just make sure that there are economic price adjustment clauses or opportunities under government contracts. So you may want to be in a position to invoke those. You also may need to incur or deal with cybersecurity requirements to the extent you have people working from home that otherwise weren't set up that way. And I will mention one last bit, which is for some smaller entities, there is SBA funding in the new program where emergency cash facilities are available for loans up to $2 million, interest rates capped at 4%. I understand the current rate's about 3.5%. And there's a link, if you just go to the SBA.gov website, you can access that capital. But we are finding some smaller businesses may not know about that. And so you may want to let folks know if it doesn't apply to you in your supply chain or otherwise. That may be something that's a source for some relief. But in any event, I'm happy to answer other questions. I'll pass it back to you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tony. So I really appreciate everyone who made time to speak today. I know some already had to leave the call. Milana, are you still on?
Yes.
Okay, great. So a few questions I'm getting here. One is, what's your view on this hypothesis that this disease is going to peak in the United States sometime within the next 8 to 12 weeks?
So first of all, the caveat is that we don't know for sure. If we see if we look at what happened with SARS and MERS, we saw the biggest peak of cases for both of these diseases. The reason why it's relevant is because they're both coronaviruses also. So we saw them peak around April, and then basically kind of fewer cases in May, and by June it was almost gone. And people say, well, it's because we've been aggressive with, containing it. But the truth is, there might be some environmental factors that we don't know about. So that's one theory, and that's why one reason why I think it'll slow down by the summer, because given the sheer number of cases, it might not go away. And actually, like with MERS, it slowed down by the summer, and then we had some more cases of that over the fall. So honestly, hard to say. Everything, all of these things are projections, but if we look at SARS and MERS, then yes, it will peak in April, but we don't know.
So if someone gets the disease, let's say I get the disease, am I then immune from getting it for the next 6 to 12 or 2 years?
Yeah. So excellent question. Everybody's asking. So for coronavirus, for the COVID-19 specifically, these studies have not been done, but there was actually just a study came out and rhesus monkeys, which were related to, and I've actually did a challenge study where they've infected the monkeys, had them be sick from COVID-19 specifically, then they've reinfected them, and all the monkeys were immune. So we're similar to monkeys. That reassures me a lot. I know there's been a lot of reports like, well, people can get it again, but keep in mind our testing is not perfect. So I think it's more that. I think unless the virus mutates, I think generally the rule of thumb is once you're getting something, it's immune. But that's my kind of sense of it.
All right. On the chat, one of our classmates is saying that he believes that there's 160,000 respirators in the U.S. Just a random aside. Another question that I have is there have been some rumors about maybe using blood mixing, I forget the proper term, blood serum from someone who has been infected, who has antibodies. This was a practice done after the 1918 Spanish flu and up to the 1950s, and it was stopped after that as vaccines became available. Are you aware of any work in that area where the feasibility?
I mean, people talk about this. They have actually done this with Ebola. I mean, it's kind of a poor man's, treatment. We use like horse serum for, the horses are immune from snake bites. I mean, you could do it. It's not usually, it's kind of a dirty way. You get a lot of kind of allergic reactions from that. It's not a great medicine. It's not a great medicine, and it's not really feasible to do because that requires processing of the blood. That's not something people talk about, but theoretically, yeah.
Okay. What about home ventilators, CPAP machines? Can those be used to help patients who can't get a hospital ventilator?
Yeah. Great question. I think at home, yes. So the thing with CPAP machines and home ventilators, they actually aerosolize the particles. So if there are other people in the home taking care of the patients, that makes them actually other family members more likely to get it. That's why actually even in the hospital settings, we try to no longer use BiPAP and CPAP machines for this specific reason. Instead, we go kind of straight to intubation. But if other people in the home are immune, or if they feel comfortable taking that kind of risk, then sure, I mean, it can help. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had a family member who was about to die, I'd be willing to get sick. I know what my chances are, so that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, they help. Of course, any kind of ventilatory support would be helpful.
Okay.
No question.
That's pretty cool. I remember I was talking to Adam Fiterstein earlier this week, and he was telling me how paranoid he was about respirators, the things that actually put the small particles in the air like a CPAP machine, but that makes sense.
Yeah, but you could definitely do it home. And by the way, there's a number actually of kind of very small compact respirators that have been designed specifically for these kinds of scenarios that are also available. So we do have some kind of emergency ventilators on board. I don't know how many of them are out there or how quickly that production can be scaled up, but that's something else that's good.
Another question is about the different strains, the L and the H strain. There's some limited case of people infected and recovered getting reinfected with different strains. What's going on with different strains? What do we know about that?
I mean, honestly, the data on this is so sparse. I mean, we barely know, I wouldn't kind of think too much about it at this point. I mean, there's also some evidence, there is different kind of, different kind of ethnic groups, there's, different people with different genetic makeups may be differently affected. But again, the data on this is just so minimal. I don't really want to comment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you have someone want to know if you had any comment? Oh, Jeremy Liu. All right, asking if you have any comment on the Columbia Dr. Adam and his colleague made a comment that spreading in the tropics and southern hemisphere is not much different than other places, and there's some different things about will this slow down in the summer, will it not? Could you comment a little bit more about your
Yeah.
views?
Honestly, I haven't looked at the data specifically. Does it spread more in the tropics or not? It's interesting that Singapore is appearing to be doing better. For example, that's kind of more hot, and tropical, but they also have excellent healthcare systems.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I can tell you that with coronaviruses, based on our lessons from SARS and from MERS, it just does not spread as well in hot and humid climates. And I'll have to look at the COVID data specifically for that,
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was playing with those numbers, and this gives us a little bit of a picture. But
Yeah.
I've got like 100 countries now on my database, and this is just a few of them. I didn't
Yeah.
notice much of a difference, except that like Taiwan and Singapore were better, but I think that was largely because of government controls than anything
Exactly.
else. And I've seen
Singapore
lots
is
of other countries.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Africa, it's amazing how many countries there are. I didn't realize till I started tracking this data. But
Yeah.
a lot of the mid-hemisphere countries are just starting to get it, but that's because of their location, like in Africa.
Yeah.
It is starting to grow there as well.
Yeah. And then as far as your seasonality question, again, when I was reading data, kind of studies from SARS, there's been a number of comments. Okay, well, SARS has really dropped by the summertime, and quote unquote, we don't know why. So there's a lot of unknowns here.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just emphasize, people are talking projections, but this is biology. This is not math. There's a lot. It's more complicated.
Yeah,
than math.
yeah, definitely.
Oh.
And so someone else is commenting too that I guess that's Jeremy there again, that Taiwan is North Hemisphere, Malaysia is seeing high infection relative to Singapore, which confirms the hypothesis that the summer isn't going to knock this thing out at all. So, all right. Well, I think I don't have any other questions on the chat. Is ordering takeout food a good idea? Low incremental risk and supports local businesses, or a bad idea? Because needless extra interactions. Any comments on that?
Well, I mean, as far as your risk of catching disease, as far as stimulating economy, as far as stopping
disease, catching
spread,
something. Yeah, safety. Safety was the driving mechanism there.
I think it's reasonable. I mean, basically, so this thing in general, unless you're like in a medical setting, this is not, this is droplet, this is not respiratory. So as long as you can be within 3 feet away from people, and pick up your food, I think it's reasonable. Would it be, safer? Cooking at home is probably safer, just because, things can be spread. I don't know, if somebody like infected with COVID-19 could be like getting, packaging your food. I suppose that could be an issue. But,
okay.
If it's hot food, I don't see an issue.
Yeah. So I think a lot of
food,
people must
wash your hands after you eat it, before you eat it, and after you eat it. Huh?
I think it's getting close to breakfast. A lot of people are getting hungry
All
and
right.
asking food questions. One of them is, what about unwrapped produce in a market? Or when you go shopping in the store, there's all this food out. You have to wash your food when you bring it home.
Yeah, excellent question. I think if the food is in packages, I think the risk of that is very low. After you unwrap it, wash your hands. I think that's very low risk. Actually, if you go shopping at the farmer's market and it's kind of open, again, UV light, I would say wash it, but, UV light, kills things generally. I suppose there's kind of very small risk you might catch something from fresh produce, but I think as long as you wash it, the detergent and soap even kills it amazingly. So I think it's reasonable.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's 9:25.
Right.
We've got over 130 people on this call, hanging on to every word you've said here. Really appreciate it. Also want to shout out thank you to everybody else who presented here and other people who contributed behind the scenes to make this possible. Have a great day. This recording, I will post it probably later tonight or tomorrow to the GSB news lists, and we'll also provide the slides as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Stay safe.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.